Welcome to this first episode in a new YouTube channel called Zero Entry, which looks at how technology is about to transform the mining industry. My name is Christian Larson. That's that picture on the screen in front of you. I have spent more than 30 years developing and commercializing technology in the mining industry. The premise of this channel is that the pandemic crisis has brought about a series of circumstances whereby the future success of a mining company is going to depend on the rate of adoption of new technologies. And that rate of adoption must radically increase from where it is today. This first episode simply lays out the thesis as to why I believe this is the case. Okay, the thesis of this channel, the setup here, is that we start with the fact that over a century, mining has been improving its productivity and its costs through economies of scale. Bigger trucks, bigger shovels, bigger drills, etc. Bigger equipment, bigger mines. And this approach has worked. What it means, though, is that in pursuing that economies of scale, you've had to treat more of your deposit or big chunks of your deposit as homogeneous. So even though it's the earth and it varies quite a bit, you've had to treat it as much the same as you can. That's injected inefficiencies, but it's allowed you to scale your organization. So it's injected this process has injected itself into the culture of mining. You wanted each of your parts of your value chain, your blasting, digging, processing, etc., to be as scalable as possible. So you kind of siloized your business and make each component scale up as need be. It does mean you've sacrificed some whole of system optimization. This has been known for some time, but economies of scale have generally worked. So it's been, an okay trade-off for the mining industry. And then around about 2000, things started to change, as was reported into a lot of the multifactored productivity figures, such as this paper. There'll be links in the description below, so you can go and look this paper up for yourself. But what happened is that the reported multifactor productivity declined. And so up until 2000, we've had pretty much a century of year-on-year growth in productivity for mining. And again, we then obviously hit a new regime at around about 2000. Now, that's in terms of the actual commodity output. But if you adjust for the actual work being done, in other words, moving dirt, you will actually see that the productivity in terms of actual earth moving actually continued to rise. So it wasn't just because of bad management or bad practices. In fact, those things continue to improve year on year. But the headwinds of depth and grade finally overcome. Came our ability to improve our productivity through traditional means. The mining industry was faced with two alternatives that it could pursue, faced with this changing circumstance. The first was just to go elsewhere. There seemed to be, during this era, plenty of known shallow, high-grade deposits around the world that was seemingly unreachable because of poor political risk circumstances. But political risks seemed to be moderating around the world, and more of these countries were opening up and ready for foreign investment, particularly in mining. So things tended to be looking quite attractive on that side. And the benefit for mining was that basically you can use the same practices that we traditionally have used, the same economies of scale, the same year-on-year improvement in productivity, and we could just apply it to these high political risk areas that are, as they moderate their political risk. The other alternative, which was also being explored at the same time, was through the fast adoption of digital technologies. Ultimately, this path leads to the zero entry mine, which is what this channel is kind of named after. But by the end of 2019, my experience and those of quite a few of my peers who I work with in the sort of technology area had actually come to the conclusion that the digital technologies pathway was not going to go ahead. Basically, we'd seen digital transformation projects, one after the other, kick off with great fanfare, with very large budgets, and ultimately they all failed. And it's not that we're not going to adopt new technology, we certainly are, but it's going to be at the more traditional pace, and as we saw from those multifactor productivity curve, not at a sufficient pace to overcome the headwinds of depth and grade. Now in 2020, of course, we've had the pandemic and the associated economic crisis that's coming with it. Now, I'm going to unfold a little bit about what that impact has been on the mining industry, but I'm actually going to start with food and food security, because I'm going to correlate the two, and you'll see why in a minute, because this is how the thesis comes together. So on this map, this is a map produced by Peter Zayan, who is the author of Disunited Nations. It's a book just come out this year, very apocryphal book. There'll be links in the text below that will actually take you to his website, and you can have a look at this map for yourself. Now, what it's showing here is which of the countries in the world are net importers and net exporters of calories. So this is all about, can you feed your country? And, it's the old, revolution's only 3 meals away. I know I'm butchering that quote, but you kind of get the idea. All right. So if you're in any of these yellows and reds and oranges, you're going to need to import food. And to import food off the global market, you need US dollars, because that's what trade, whatever you want to think about it, that's what trade is in today. Not everybody in the world has access to US dollars. Now, here we are at the Federal Reserve, the US Federal Reserve website, and there's a thing called dollar liquidity swap lines. And when you go to this website and look at that dollar liquidity swap lines, again, I'm going to butcher this, but essentially these are countries that can print their own currency, and the US will print some matching amount of that currency, and you get to swap them. So you can therefore get hold of US dollars, and if you have US dollars, you can go to the open market, World Trade, and acquire food. But only about 15 jurisdictions in the world can have access to that. So here I've marked in the nations with those swap lines, and the one thing you notice is that a lot of the areas that are in red, orange and yellow, the ones who are net importers of calories, actually don't have swap lines. And they also happen to coincide with the big areas of those shallow, high-grade deposits, Central Africa and the stands. So guess what? The moving to another country, to moving out of our mature mining jurisdictions is now off the table. So guess what? It's pivot back. It's time for digital technologies. And we're now faced with the necessity of overcoming those cultural barriers that we had to fast adoption. And that's what I think the next decade is going to look like. And I suspect that the shallow, high-grade deposits, the political risk is going to rise, and we're going to see them off the table for that decade. So that's the setup. So to be a successful miner in the mature mining regions, you'll have to combine digitization with actuation and machine learning to end up at the zero entry mine, which is what this channel's called after. This kind of names the aspiration which we're all looking for. This in turn will lead to smaller footprints for mining, lower costs, and highly improved ESG performance, and what I would believe in ultimately a lower cost of capital. To achieve these things will require cultural change on a scale we've probably haven't seen in a century. So I'm going to have many episodes, and I'm going to do kind of three things. Each episode will do a particular thing. I wanted to explore transformation experiences in other industries and try to relate them across to mining. What might work for us, what might not. I'm also going to occasionally look into various management theories, both old and new. Obviously, I'm going to particularly look at the Silicon Valley kind of theories that might be emerging around the transformation space, such as software eats the world. I'm also going to interview actual practitioners, people who've implemented new technologies and new techniques in mining where there have been a success, and contrast that with their experienced failures to see what can be learned in that tension between success and failure. So if you're interested in taking this journey with me, hit the like, subscribe, and notification icon. That'll send me a clear signal that this is for you as well. Anyway, hope to see you in future episodes.